MarTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of MarTechTalk. I'm your host, Luke, and today we'll be joined by two wonderful panelists. And you're more than welcome to get involved yourself using the chat box to the side. But before I introduce our panelists, let's set the scene for what we're discussing. This week's topic is lead management automation. Is your MarTech lagging behind? We'll begin by talking about defining your lead lifecycle. So what is best practice in managing data to maximize sales opportunities? And that should lead us nicely into discussing ROI calculations, specifically measuring the effect of your lead gen automation. Then finally, we can look at choosing that lead gen tech to best nurture your qualified leads. So let's begin by welcoming our lovely panelists this week. In no particular order, can I ask you to turn on your camera and mic when I introduce you, please? First, Tony, Senior Director of E-Commerce at Olam Food Ingredients.
Hi, Luke. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. And Nikki, I see you there. Hi, Nikki, Director of Demand Generation and Sales Enablement at Equifax Workforce Solutions. Hi, Nikki.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. So, should we dive straight into the news item for this week?
Let's go.
Cool. We've got an article here from Business Wire entitled "New Research Reveals 9 out of 10 Companies Lose Revenue Due to Issues in the Lead Lifecycle Management Process." It then goes on to talk about how teams struggle with manual processes, siloed systems, and complex tech stacks. One interesting comment from Dominic Lewis, the CRO and co-founder of Trade.io, reads, "Companies must deliver more personalized experiences in a timely manner for a large number of buyers. This puts tremendous pressure on operations teams to not only save time and cut costs, but also establish competitive differentiation through superior customer experiences." So, what are your takes on this? Tony, can I come to you first to get us started, please?
Sure. I think the article is a good introduction to a couple of the key issues you do encounter when you're trying to implement MarTech, particularly around lead management. You definitely run into those manual processes that people just can't seem to find a way around. Usually they come about because of business rules. We have to enter data in a certain way, in a certain order, and the systems don't talk to each other, so it ends up being a very manual process. And how do you get past that? Or, we have to everything go through a certain step of review processes that are manual. And how do you work through that? That's definitely accurate. The whole topic of siloed systems, while there are many good open source systems out there, there's certainly the larger companies you get to, the more likely you're running into high garden walls that get in the way of things talking to each other. So again, I think it's highlighting a few issues I've certainly encountered over my time.
You have.
So, like the example of the manual processes, in one instance of, when I talk about those review processes, we had leads coming in to a call center, but they were literally doing double data entry. So they'd take it out of the system and put it manually into this other system because it had to be put in certain steps, and certain approvals had to happen before you could move on to the next step. You wouldn't think that, right? And what we were able to do by doing some process engineering there and really working with the business group is say, okay, those approvals, most of those are actually logic flows. And it doesn't require a human interaction. We were letting humans do it, but it didn't require that human interaction to do that review of that aspect. And the one true human judgment bit could be left to the end. So we applied RPA using UiPath to move that data into that system in a certain sequence of actions because it moved from screen to screen to screen, and at the same time do those logic assessments. Did it meet the right criteria? And by that way, we were able to reduce the time to get the leads in front of our call center from upwards of 2-3 days to every morning, everything's ready for them the moment they walk in the door. During the day, all new leads are flowing in within a couple hours. It just, changed that system overnight. And for that particular business, it was absolutely critical. You could not wait 3 days to call the customer back. Their need was immediate. You needed to talk to them right away. So it was a game-changing instance in that. And again, it wasn't the lead management aspect, those other technologies we're applying in. It was the core system and the business rules that were the obstacle.
Lovely to hear that there was a way found around that, and to have such a measurable outcome, such a difference of days like that must have been pretty satisfying.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Nikki, can I pass over to you, please?
Sure. So there's a couple of things that really struck me about this article. And the first, it just reminds you how complex things can get. So when you get to a point of starting to customize your systems along the way, it begins to add those complexities. And every business gets there, right? You always end up customizing something because systems aren't built just for your company. So it's really important as you take the time and going through the process to make sure things aren't broken along the way. Because I've seen that happen many times. Just a little background, most of my marketing career, I've been in B2B. So we're looking at that long lead cycle and seeing where the technologies fit in and where they talk to each other is the most critical piece. And drawing that out and looking at, do we have too many systems? Are there not enough systems? What are our gaps in technology that we need to be looking at? And the most important, and I think this is something that coming both from a small background and a large business background, the number one thing is people love to implement new technologies. What you can't do is set it and forget it. And that's when you start to lose those leads along the way, is something got missed, or a connection is no longer missed, or a technology changed. And so there are those gaps that you're losing those leads, or they're kind of disappearing into a black hole, so to speak. So it really does take maintenance to keep up and make sure everything continues to talk to each other.
Yeah, the dream of just switching it on and leaving it to it is not reality.
Yes.
Which brings us nicely into our first discussion point: defining your lead life cycles, best practice in managing data to maximize sales opportunities. I think, as you were saying there, Tony, it's sort of about recognizing the issues so that you can then take actions to actually fix them. But yeah, I wonder what your take is on this.
So I think that question is really getting to the core of it, because in any case of automation, it lives and dies by the data that you can feed to it. And if you don't have the data, the finest system and the jazziest technology will not work. It needs to have the data. And I myself, over my career, I've been surprised, frankly, in instances where I walk into a company that you would expect certain pieces to already be in place. And again, I get surprised that even a core CRM, or shall we say in some cases, a properly implemented CRM, is lacking. And if you don't have that fundamental building block, it's hard to do much of anything. But yet it is surprising the number of companies that are in the business of selling, which we're all in the business of selling, that don't have a CRM. They have an accounting system that has a list of customers, but that's not a CRM. That's not a system that allows you to store all of your customer data, give you 360 view of the customer from a marketing and sales perspective, not just from an accounting and logistics perspective. So that's item number one. And then item number two, when you get to talking about properly implemented, any technology project is a change management project. And if you don't get your staff on board with feeding that system, again, it won't work. I can implement the best, cleanest CRM in the world, but if my team doesn't feed it the data, because not all data just comes from digital sources. If my team doesn't feed it with the data, again, it won't work. And particularly when you're looking at, is my automation working? If you don't have that downstream data about the sales cycle, past the point of initial customer acquisition, but all the way through the sales cycle, you're not really going to know whether it's working or not, and what's working and what's not working.
So it's not about having the tools necessarily, it's about the change management that makes them useful.
Right. Yeah, you have to get the team on board, and you have to get them convinced on the value of putting the data into the system so that you can truly maximize the value. And it's not just about selling them on the value of marketing automation. They need to see the value for their own work. And that's really what's going to make it happen.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of closed garden, and is that one of the big issues then? It's kind of shaking up the way things work?
Well, that's a closed garden. It's a different kind of closed garden, right? So it's not a good question. It's not a matter of it's a system garden. It's a matter of a business silo. And yes, I certainly have unfortunately encountered sales functions that will let me have access to the customer when I pry it from their cold dead fingers. But that we're supposed to be a team. I can help you, but you need to help me help you. And that means you need to let me know, when did you call the customer last? I'm not asking you because I'm trying to say you've taken too long and you're doing a terrible job. I just want to know, because if I can stand back and look, when you call them, when your last call was 30 days versus 7 days versus 90 days, or what was your call frequency there? And I can see how that data aligns with acquisition data and aligns with the subsequent conversion data, then I can help inform you, like, what is your best cycle? You may actually be overcalling, not undercalling. Help me help you.
And you mentioned earlier about the getting the data in multiple times, and I suppose that's about not only convincing people to work differently, but also to get the actual tools in there to bring that old data and put it in a new system. Yeah,
and how to make it easy. Of course, many of the systems have done that, but to Nikki's point, sometimes a little bit of customization goes a long way. And I've been in major projects, implementing, an example, a CRM. It's a really big deal, and frankly, you try to minimize customization, because the more customization you do, as Nikki was implying, the more likely it is to break later on. But there was an instance I can think of a particular one. We're implementing a CRM and a customer didn't have one before. And you try to recruit sales leaders that can really be your evangelists on that team and spread the word. And this particular project, I had one of them on there, and it came down to, at the end of logging a call, you had to select a call closing reason from a drop-down menu. Now, there was pretty much a default that you would expect for it. And what she said is, Tony, that's just too much work for me to select that drop-down menu. Can you just make it a button? Just make it a button for the most common reason. And I said, Rose, for you, I'm going to make it a button. So I made a big blue button for the most common reason. It was sitting right next to the drop-down menu. And if you hit the big blue button, it would change the drop-down menu to the default value and submit. But it made her happy. And then she convinced others. So small cost customization, big value change management. So I've always used the blue button as my standard. If there's a way I can then just add the small blue button that has big value, I'll do it, because that's what it takes to make it work.
I love that, combining the new tech and the changing people's minds all in one. That's brilliant.
Right.
Nice. Thank you. Nikki, can I pass over to you next?
Sure. Tony, I think you hit on something really important, which is lead technology requires that sales and marketing alignment. If you don't have that and everyone's not bought in, it's not going to happen. And one thing I have found along the way is being able to show those results to sales and saying, here's how this works, or even take it a step back and say, I cannot email a company. I have to email a contact in the company. So I need you to put the contact information in, or they're not going to get that webinar invite or that nurture email or that employee communication that they needed to go out about their system. So I think showing them and kind of telling them what they're missing out on really helps with that buy-in piece. And then you can even take that data and say, okay, when we're looking at our lead life cycle, here's the areas where we're seeing really big impact. Or even when we do this piece or this type of action, we typically see a life cycle of 6 months, 18 months, and figure out where you're getting those shorter lead cycles. How are we closing more deals? So that's really important. The other thing I really think about from a lead life cycle is different leads require different lead life cycles, and that is becoming more and more apparent. Everyone always talks about the funnel, right? The sales funnel and what that buyer journey should look like. And now it's just a big scrambling mess, right? Because everyone has their own journey and they figure out their own way along the way. So I work with anything from, we're working with small companies who have 50 employees and they're looking at e-commerce solutions. They don't have the same buyers that we're looking at, so we have to profile them differently in our lead management system. And then we work with the Fortune 500 companies where they're not taking the same actions, not even close. And so really making sure that you're building those leads and those profiles for the appropriate pieces, for the appropriate customers that you want is really critical at the end of the day.
Yes, thank you. And talking of building in, I've got a question here from the audience that follows on quite nicely from Rebecca. I might pass it to both of you to have your takes on it. She asks, what do you think is the best way to integrate a marketing automation platform with a CRM system? I don't know how much detail you want to go into with that, but Tony, if you've got any take on that?
So I'll admit I have a bias. I mean, I do have a pretty deep technical background. I started in the world as a programmer and moved more into the marketing side. But yet I retain a bias that I will go with the quote unquote lowest tech solution and work my way up from there. And the reason I have that bias is because of the long-term maintenance costs that come with any system, and the lower tech I can get to, generally speaking, not always, generally speaking, it's my lower cost of long-term ownership. So that's where I start. But I'll say the other absolute thing, this gets what something Nikki was hinting at earlier, documentation. So many projects jump right over documentation. And when it comes to integration, you cannot afford to jump over documentation, because I guarantee you that the person who designed the automation at integration eventually will not be there. And that's when it'll break. And that's when you're going to find out how expensive it is. So those are two key things I'd give to anybody looking to do the integration. I would start with a low-tech solution and work my way up. And I would make sure that I'm investing significantly in the documentation of this so that it is easier for somebody else to walk in from the outside. It's the whole Mack truck school management, right? That person gets hit by the truck, who's going to be able to pick that up tomorrow and still make it work and make the changes that I need?
Lovely, thanks, Tony. And Nikki, do you have a take, or has that covered it?
I would say when I'm thinking about it, one, I look first at my CRM and say, do they have something that is already integrated with the CRM that we can utilize, and start there. So for example, if you're on Salesforce or using Pardot or Marketing Cloud, find things that are natively integrated. It may not have every bell and whistle that you want, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot easier to integrate, because you can get fields to match up and you can get all of those things to work together a lot faster than trying to build an API to integrate those for those systems to talk, because you really want those systems to talk back and forth.
Thank you. There you go, Rebecca. Hope that helped. With that, you mentioned earlier, Nikki, about the funnel changing. You gave us this lovely image of it, a mess, which is quite helpful for leading us on to our next point about the ROI calculator. Measuring the effectiveness of your lead gen optimization. How to do that in the wake of that. And I'll keep going in order, so I'll come back to you. But Tony, if I pass to you on that one first.
So, recognizing what Nikki said in terms of how it's moved to string theory when it comes to trying to measure the customer journey, I agree fundamentally with that. That said, everyone does go through a certain set of stages. It's just what they do in each of those stages has now changed a bit, and there are more fragmentation to those stage approaches. I think one of the things that we spend, frankly, more time on in marketing and less time that we should is we spend more time looking at the very top, just above the top of the funnel in terms of acquisition and studying that aspect of it. We need to spend a little less time on that side and spend a lot more time downstream understanding which actions after lead acquisition are truly impacting the conversion. And for many businesses, if you have a recurring revenue model, it's about lifetime value, right? It's not just a single purchase. You're after recurring purchases, recurring revenue. You want to understand which sources of customers is so important, but which sequences of actions, and then all the way past post-purchase, particularly for companies with recurring revenue. It is as much about post-purchase activity as it is about initial acquisition and conversion. And if you're not looking at ROI from that full spectrum, I can guarantee you're going to miss something. And again, in previous life, I had previous analysis has been done. They thought for sure they knew which customer sources were their most fruitful, and that was correct when it came to initial conversion. When I overlaid that with customer lifetime value, it very quickly showed that that was not the best audience for lifetime value. And that, in fact, by shifting our efforts to several other customer segments, we could get a whole geometric, quantum leap in revenue gain. And so that's what we did. And we shifted our spend accordingly, and it did dramatically pay off. But it was only came by overlaying that lifetime value, what was happening after the first purchase, to drive subsequent purchases that really changed that perspective. So I think it's very important to look at, again, for particularly in nowadays with so many companies focused on SaaS. It's about recurring revenue. You need to stop looking at just your top of funnel and your acquisition costs, and you need to even look beyond conversion to subsequent conversion and your lifetime revenue.
It makes me wonder, does that, when you get that feedback at the end, that this sort of feedback loop that's proved useful, does that encourage that to be done more? Or is it kind of like, right, we did that, big success, let's start looking at the top of the funnel again?
Well, what you end up doing is, like in that particular analysis, there were definitely, it's just a matter of your rank ordering your customer segments. That's how you're changing it. And so you start optimizing them one at a time. To Nikki's point, it's not one funnel that you can optimize with turning a few wrenches. It's now lots of strings, and I have to straighten out each string one at a time. And so, you start with your top one. Okay, this is my definitely best audience. Let's make sure I've got the most from that. Okay, now let me go back to my next second best audience, and again analyze it, as you said, from beginning to end. But I'm not reperforming the whole analysis. I'm just moving through what I've already know now to be my top performers and getting the most from them. And then eventually you go back to, okay, now let me go reassess my sources and who have I overlooked, and now let's start working from there.
So getting more efficient as you go. Right, nice. And Nikki, how have you been untangling this web?
So, from a B2B perspective, it is really about where are you pulling in the data? Where are those leads coming from? And they could be very different from a consumer perspective. And so, I work very closely with our RevOps team, and it is all about, do we have the dashboards where we can look into the data? And don't just look at the surface level, dig into why, look at those trends. We found, hey, all of a sudden, we're not getting leads from this place anymore. Why is that? And we figured out that form that's connected into our lead gen system was broken. And so we had to fix that, and all of a sudden we were getting leads again, right? So it's really important to kind of keep track of that. And then those dashboards really help you to start to break down the pieces of data. So, for example, I can look at things from multiple ways. I want to be able to see from an individual, if we go to trade shows or we hold a webinar or we hold a customer event, what are the different ROIs from there? And you look at those leading indicators that really help you to say, hey, this is where I'm going to see my best return. And to your point, Luke, we do dig in, right? We say, if this is working, let's do it again. And let's do it better, and let's keep moving on it. And we're actually doing that right now. We've seen success with some client events held a specific way, and so we are continuing that effort with that next customer segment to say, you know what, I bet it's going to work with this audience too. We could be very wrong because it is a different audience, but it's worth a shot because we did see such great success with it.
So will that continue then, sort of like until that technique fails? Does it continue to get used in test, I suppose?
Yes, everything's always in testing, right? Everything's beta testing. So yes, we will continue to do that. And from that point, we also look at our technology and what is working there. So we enable our sales teams to help with lead gen activities as well. It's not just necessarily what we're nurturing leads with, but what are the tools that we're putting in their hands to send out, thought leadership and expertise or invites or, getting in for that next business review so that we can look at cross-sell opportunities. We want to take a look at all of those tools as well and say, are we getting the ROI? Are they utilizing it? If not, why? How can we fix it? We hold focus groups to make sure things are getting used. And if not, figure out why and what we can do better.
Nice. And you mentioned tools there, and I noticed we've got another question come in from Alice. Thank you, Alice. And she asked, would you recommend any particular tools to measure the effectiveness of lead gen automation? So you're on a roll, Nikki. Can I stay with you for that one, please?
Okay. So it depends on your system. And I know that's the worst answer ever, but it really does. So for example, if you have Salesforce, Salesforce has dashboard tools, or maybe you integrate a Tableau that you can build out of. And, Tableau integrates into almost everything. So I think you find your tool in your system. And then you really just kind of create your own dashboards and make your own KPIs so that you can measure against it, even if it's just a starting point or a baseline. And you'll kind of start to see, those trends and figure out what's going on.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to, if it's all right, Tony, I'm going to pass this over to you as well, because you said about your tech background. So,
sure.
Thanks.
I have yet to find, as much as I talked earlier about having the necessity of a core system and a CRM, I have yet to find one that has an effective reporting system for what I want to look at when it comes to the full cycle for lead gen. So therefore, inevitably, rather than trying to find some way to customize that very expensive and very complex system, I inevitably try instead to then extract the data out into another environment, such as Nikki said, Tableau is a classic one. Of course, there's 3-4 others lead in that same area. Whole point being, pull your data into whatever your company wants to talk about nowadays, lakes, whatever you want to talk about, right? Pull that data out into an external environment, pool it together, and then put a tool like Tableau on top of it, Nikki made a great point. Everybody wants to slice a little bit differently. So I just find it more constructive in the end to provide a tool that allows those who want to dive deep to be able to dive deep, but also gives you, again, that very nice dashboard approach that if I just need to communicate with the key set executives, and then I can just very quickly use a tool like Tableau and recurringly publish out that view.
Thanks. There you go. Let's hope you've heard Tableau in there. That sounds like the one filtering to the top.
Well, it's we'll call that the buzzword of the category, right? But
yeah, we're not promoting any particular one. They're just should caveat that at the end there.
Sure.
But it does take us on to our next point, which allows us to talk about more tech. Choosing lead gen tech that nurtures your qualified leads. I know we've touched on this, but if I could pass over to you again, Tony, carry on without a break, if you're all right, to keep discussing this.
I may go a little afield with this because I frankly think that most of the major platforms have a sufficiently developed feature set when it comes to marketing automation that I'm not necessarily going to recommend one over the other. Instead, what I'd like to emphasize is it comes down to how you implement it, not necessarily which tool that you're selecting. And the number one mistake I think that people can make is to have eyes bigger than their stomachs. The first time I did a marketing automation project, we built the most complex tree you could possibly imagine. And it was, I think in the end it was in first draft over 100 email variations that were in this one email tree. And it only grew more than that before it got to implementation. That whole thing collapsed under its own weight because the cost, the business cost, the time cost, the attention cost of optimizing that level of complexity and continuing through doing a continuous improvement cycle on it, you just didn't do it. And frankly, in the end, when you do the numbers, it wasn't worth it. From that, I developed a simple set of 4 questions that I take every kind of project like this through to help figure out what our real segments are for these kinds of projects. And it's what are we trying to get them to do? What's the business outcome we want? But then quickly flip it. What's the customer outcome? What are they looking for? What's their outcome? And the next thing is, and then what motivates them? What truly motivates them? And then lastly, what do we have to say, or what can we do to appeal to their motives, to get them what they want, but also get us what we want? Those 4 questions. And typically when I run through this exercise, initially the teams will lay out 15, 20 segments across the top of the board without any problem. Once we ask those 4 questions, they very quickly realize there might be 4, 5 different, actually legitimately different segments. Because ones they thought were really different, they're different because they were perhaps in different industry niches, but in the end, they had the same goal, and they had very similar motives. And we weren't going to say things that much different to them. So that's a set of 4 questions I've used. And really the fundamental is looking at it from the customer perspective and what's their objective and what's their motive, that I find simplifies the approach to automation and again makes you create a system that is truly more manageable, and you can scale it as you work along. It's much easier to scale out a little bit than it is to just try and scale it back. That's just the natural flow of human behavior. So that's the main thing I would have to offer. Again, I think from a technology platform, there are quite a few out there. They're all perfectly serviceable, but they are also all perfectly bad because of the way we implement them, not because of the system.
Yeah, I love the image of the tree that you gave at the start there, and this idea of trimming back the branches to just the big 4 or 5 big branches.
Yeah, but the whole point was you never trim a tree, because the problem is you take a tree like that and you trim it, you kill it. The whole point is not to envision such a huge tree anymore. I don't need that vast oak tree I've got in my backyard that has all those branches. I just need this nice little fruit tree. Nice little fruit tree gives me the fruit for my business every year. It is very manageable.
Yeah, I've got the image Nikki gave of all the wires, and I'm thinking of a bonsai tree, and you're chopping all these many branches, and lots of work. But yeah, can I pass over to you next, Nikki? I might come back to talk about, because we're dipping our toes in AI here. We're getting to the edge of complexity where AI might be helpful, but for now, if we just stick to the lead gen, if we've got time at the end,
talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Tony, I think you called out something really important. I like to call that scope creep, because you have this scope going in, and then all of a sudden you see all these new shiny things. You're like, oh, I want to do that. And so I've been through many a technology process so far, and by that I mean I need to sell that to leadership to say, hey, this is the need and this is the requirement for it, and this is what we're going to get out of it. And so I have found over the years that I create a process for our team, and I say, if we're looking at this new lead nurture system that we want to buy, let's start with 1, what do we have so far? 2, I want to write out all of my requirements. So, and I mean very tactical requirements, because what you'll find is that base system, like Tony was talking about, kind of starting at that lowest denominator, may fit all of your criteria. And what you're leaning towards are these shiny tools that you don't necessarily need, or your team's not necessarily going to use, or you may not even be ready for it yet. I've been in that situation as well. So start with those requirements and make a little grid and say, if I need my lead gen to, I need it to be able to build multiple streams. I need it to be able to profile people, so I know what nurture I'm sending to them. Start building all those out, and then you can kind of make check marks next to your different systems to say, okay, here's what they have, here's what they don't have. And it gives you a really good evaluation process along the way. And then write up your use cases and, tell leadership, hey, this is what I'm going for, and this is what I'm going to be using it for. And then start with that outcome, or end with that outcome, I should say, because it kind of building that story for them and showing them what this could do for the organization as a whole to mesh with sales. That's when you're going to eventually get that buy-in. So that evaluation process is probably one of the most critical things I've seen along the way to make sure you're really getting what you need and not what you necessarily want to have.
Nice. And recognizing, what you need. It's important. Alice has come back with another question here, asking any tips on generating high quality leads. Similar thing, I suppose. Tony, can I ask you any answers?
So I'm going to go to the 4 questions I just shared. Because if you do not understand your customer and how to motivate them, then you're not going to get, and your chances of getting high quality leads decrease dramatically, and it becomes a dart throw. And I don't mean by a dart throw somebody who actually knows how to throw darts. So I'll go back to those 4 questions of what is it you want, what is it they want, what motivates them, and what can you say or do with them to motivate them to do what they want that also gets you what you want. If you can answer those 4 questions really well, you're going to be off to a good start with creating a campaign that can be very effective.
Thank you. And if you didn't get that down, Alice, we've got the recording of this, so you can make notes later. And Nikki, did you have a take for Alice?
So for me, it is if you have a set of leads and you have any data that you can actually look at and dig into, look through your Google Analytics and see, are the leads that are going through and we're getting that, to Tony's point, that better lifetime value out of. And maybe they're in a specific industry or a specific state or age range. It could be a ton of different things, but start to focus your efforts there. And it's amazing what a boost you can see because you've now identified your ideal customer profile. And it may be multiple, as Tony said, but at least, you have those profiles and you start putting your marketing dollars there, your spend, your digital ads to bring those specific leads in because you're seeing better quality leads out of them. So data is your friend.
Thank you. We've got 4 minutes. I want us to touch on AI just quickly.
That's good.
Because we've sort of got there, haven't we? I mean, all this complexity is AI going to help things? Is going to simplify, tying processes together, or is it going to add complications? How do you feel about it, Tony?
So I'll go ahead and pick a fight because I'm sure there's going to be people out there that are very have strong feelings about the capabilities and possibilities for this field. I'm just going to describe where I think we are right now. From what I've seen and from what I've tested, I think that AI is perfectly serviceable right now for generating general, quote, factual narrative type content. When it comes to marketing, I've seen and tried a number of different ways. I haven't yet seen AI generate a truly manipulative bit of content for me to use from a sales and marketing perspective. And let's be front, we're in the manipulation business. That's my job. I'm playing a fear and greed game, and I'm trying to motivate people to do things. It's not there yet, and I'll go ahead and say, and frankly, if and when it gets to a point where AI can generate content freely that can manipulate people to do certain things, I've got bigger issues to worry about than lead gen automation.
Yeah, when you said that kind of good point. What about you, Nikki? Are we are our overlords upon us?
I'm going into AI with a little bit of skepticism because I do think there are places where it can be great, but you get out of AI what you put into it too. You feed it that data and then it takes that and it puts it together for you in the format that you want. So I think there could be use cases for it. I've seen different departments and functions start to trend towards it. And what they're using it for is to help automate what has been very manual for them in the past or very administrative tasks that they don't necessarily want their people doing because they want them to be more strategic. So I think there's a space for it. When it comes to lead gen at this point, I don't know that I'm totally on board yet. I'm sure we'll get there as more comes to fruition, but right now I'm really looking at it from a more administrative and how can we use it to our advantage so that we can focus on bigger things.
Yeah, still another tool in the tool belt at the moment, it seems. Okay, thanks very much, guys. We've run out of time. Usually end on a little question, a short one-word answer or a 20-second answer. And I wrote it before we started, but I think it's quite apt now from what we've talked about. It's get the latest tech or squeeze the most out of your current setup. I think I can guess your answers now, but Tony, I'll ask you first.
Squeeze.
Squeeze from Tony. And Nikki?
Same, squeeze.
Squeeze, yeah, I thought I'd hear that. Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Unless you know you've got a rock, in which case, yeah, go get something different.
Well, thank you for joining us. And thanks also to all our guests that have joined us this week. Join us again next week on Tuesday the 30th at 3 p.m. BST, where the subject will be marketing in the metaverse, innovation, experimentation, and challenges. Until then, have a great week and goodbye for now. Thank you.